I'm excited to share with you this quick quilted pot holder on this episode of My First Quilt. Hi there, welcome to My First Quilt. I'm Sara, and in this episode I have an adorable quilted pot holder to share with you. It's got a little fried egg on it. I love this project. So we're going to talk a little bit about applique techniques and how to bind a round project. That's where we're going to start. So what I've got here is my almost completed project. I'm going to show you how to put the binding on. And it starts with a black background fabric and some insulated batting. Now you can quilt this background fabric if you like. It adds a little extra texture and dimension. And then you're going to need to take a piece of double-sided fusible web and trace each of the egg shapes that are in the pattern. Once you trace them all out, you can cut on the lines, and of course you're fusing that double-sided web to the wrong side of your fabrics, and then you can position them onto your background fabric. You would do this after you quilted it if you're going to quilt it. And I've cut my pieces just a little bit oversized, so I don't have to worry a whole lot about where exactly I center my little fried egg here. I'm not sure that you'd really be able to tell if it wasn't perfectly centered. So I'm just going to peel off the paper backing on my egg piece here. So we'll take all of that paper backing right off. And this is a peel and stick, so we can stick it right into position. And now we'll take the center of our egg yolk. Same thing. Here we go. We're going to stick that right into position. And then there's just a little accent color, a little crescent of an accent yellow. There we go. And you can place this wherever you like. I'm just going to put it right along the edge here. If you're happy with the placement of all of your pieces, you can take your hot iron and just fuse it all into position. I love working with fusible applique like this because it holds everything so nice and flat for me as I stitch. There we go. I'm just going to press all my background fabric so that nothing shifts as we stitch. And now we're going to take this right on over to the machine. And I've threaded my machine with a yellow thread that's going to work with my egg yolks. And you want to make sure that when you're doing an applique stitch like this, that you start on the center portion of your applique, not on the outside edges of the whites. Because if anything puckers or shifts, it's all going to kind of flatten out if you stitch from the center out. I've threaded my machine, like I said, with a yellow thread, and I've set it up with a zigzag stitch, a really short, narrow zigzag stitch, just so that it makes what we call a satin stitch. Now when you're working with an applique stitch like this, you want to stitch a little slowly and stop and pivot when you need to turn a corner or a curve like I just did. I like for my machine to stop with the needle in the down position so that I can easily pivot. And I started with the the inside edge of my egg yolk, and now I can move right around to the outside edge. And for this portion, I'm just going to stretch out my stitch a little bit, make it a little bit wider. Okay, so I've successfully stitched all the way around my egg yolk, and I did lock in my stitch at the end there. Get that little fuzzy out of there. Trim our threads. There we go. So once you've completed stitching all the way around your egg yolk, you could switch to a white thread to go around the egg white, and then the applique portion is complete. Then you're ready to trim this to a circular size. You can use the template that's in the pattern, or you could literally use a dinner plate. It makes for a really nice sized pot holder. Once you have trimmed your circle, I went around the edges of mine with my serger just to hold all those layers together. And now it's time to add the binding. You don't have to finish the edges with your serger. I just do that a lot of times if I'm going to add a bias binding, just because it kind of holds everything in position for me. But you've got to make sure that when you cut your binding strips that you're not cutting on the straight of grain. A lot of times if we're doing a straight of grain binding, we cut literally from the fold to the selvage edge of our fabric and then join our strips end to end. And that's great when you're going around the edges of a quilt that is square or rectangular shaped. But when you're working with a circle like this, in order for the fabric to bend around the curves of your circle, it does have to be bias cut, which means you cut at a 45-degree angle to the straight of grain. And that's going to make sure that your binding will flex right around the curves of your project. I cut mine 2 1/4. You could make it whichever size you like. And now I'm going to begin stitching this and show you how it looks as that binding just kind of bends around my pot holder. Now I've switched my machine back to a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm just going to slowly work right around the edges of my pot holder. Don't be afraid to stop and adjust your fabric in your hands as you go. Okay, now I'm just about to where I began, so I need to make sure that I sort of overlap my binding pieces. This part's a little trickier when you're working on a curved edge, but we can do this. Bring that edge back over, cut off my excess first. Cut a little bit more off. There we go. Fold that edge over. You can use any of your favorite binding joining techniques. This is just kind of a quick, easy way to overlap it. Pull that right to the back. There we go. And then finish stitching around. There we have it. So we've made it all the way around. I'm going to cut off some of this excess binding there with my little snips. So now that we've stitched all the way around, it's a matter of pressing our bias edge back over our seam allowance, and then you're just going to top stitch it down, or you could hand stitch it, whatever is your favorite method. I personally am a big fan of using the machine stitches. I generally will fuse the edge down or maybe glue it with a favorite fabric glue and then come back through and top stitch it, and you have a completed pot holder. How cute is that? It'd be such a great little housewarming gift or even a holiday gift. I hope that you've enjoyed this quick and easy little quilted applique lesson, and you'll come back and see me again on My First Quilt. My First Quilt is brought to you by Baby Lock, Free Spirit Fabrics, Madeira, and Hobbs Batting.